The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. 360 Energy is a North American leader in energy and carbon reduction. Recently, we have launched the 360 Carbon Excellence Program, designed to make corporate climate change actions more effective and successful. For more information, check the link in our podcast description. Welcome back, Dave and John.
Well, thanks, Lysandra. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's good to be back. Looking forward to today.
Yes, today is an exciting episode to kick off the year. So today we'll be talking about 5 things to do to start your year on the right foot for energy and carbon management. Now, Dave and John both have their 5 different points, and I think in some cases they're in no order or priority. These are just 5 things that we think are important that you should be considering to start off your year. So which one of you wants to start with your first one?
Well, why don't I start off, since it's the first of the year, and wish people Happy New Year?
Yes.
And I'll start with my first one that I think is very important, and that is the people, when they're in the position to start taking action on energy/carbon, I think one of the first steps that they'll want to consider or need to do is to understand and have the ability of capturing critical data to actually do the second step. So now I'll wait till the second step, but you'll want to know what that data is and be able to easily capture it. That is the challenge, because this data is out there, but it's not that easy to capture. So let me give you an example. Utility billing is rich with content if you know what you're looking for and you can collect and select that information on a consistent basis. It's really critical. But that tends to stop people because they don't know how to capture that information, or it's time consuming or costly. You also have to look at, when you're doing this, it's not just energy data, but you also have to look at other drivers such as temperature, heating degree day, cooling degree day. If you're in real estate, you'll need to know your square footage. If you're in the manufacturing, you'll need to know production, getting access to production data, daily production data, things of that nature, or number of hours per month, labor hours. So those are key things. And I know from our experience, it sounds really pretty simple, but it can be quite daunting for customers to find that data, but then to regularly capture that. So I'll put that over to you, John. What's your next? What would be yours?
Well, thank you. When we were preparing for this, one of the things that struck me is that Dave and I have been working together since 1995, and there's probably going to be, shall we say, a bit of duplication between us. But I've tried to start with where data is going to come up through mine. There's no argument, and I think Dave's going to go back to data. But my first one is really try to understand what energy and carbon mean to your organization. Sort of at a real high level. What do you use it for? What happens if it costs more? How does it impact on your reputation? Looking at it in that big picture, because I think sometimes you can get really, this is not against collecting data, but some of the people who are doing the data stuff are so buried in the data that they're forgetting you've got to look at this thing in a business context, and particularly now that we're heading for transitions to net zero and things like that. So one of the things to do in this new year is to take a fresh look of what does energy, and I'm going to say energy as a starter because we know that leads to our scope 1 and 2 emissions, but what does energy mean to your organization? How critical is it to you, and how does it influence your business model?
John, I'm going to pick up on your point, because it is so true that I think most clients don't think about it much. Certainly in North America, maybe it's different in Europe. I think it is. But we've always had it cheap. It's always been reliable. There hasn't, and for those reasons, I think sometimes it's just deemed as a pass-through, and people don't even think of it as an input cost that is controllable. So I think it's a really good point.
I think you're right there. I can remember way back looking at some early management accounts, and you'd have a heading heat, light and power, and it was in the same grouping as rent and insurance. And there was very much that it's what it is. And so, yeah, now let's be honest, for some organisations, energy use might be such a small part of their operating costs and their business that really, how critical is it? But if you haven't done some basic look at it, how do you know that's the situation?
I'm going to pick up on what you said as well. We work with organizations, there's one organization that's $2 billion worth that we've worked with. But there's organizations that spend $150,000. And because they've never looked at it, John, when they do look at it in such a way, actually the savings, we found the savings like for 25% because no one ever looked at it or understood what to do and how to do it. So even though it's a really small fraction of maybe your operating cost, a little focus on it will go a long way for clients.
Yeah, and I think in the current times where everybody's publicly aware of where energy costs are going, it is a really good time to sort of, recalibrate as to what energy is for you and where it sits within your organisation.
Yeah, I'd also like to let our listeners know that in the beginning, when we started recording this podcast, we do have a lot of basic episodes up right about all this stuff. So we have the energy and carbon business basics, we have managing energy and carbon goals, the importance of data management. So if you're interested in any of those episodes, they're episodes 2, 3, 4, and 5. So give those a listen if that's where you want to start off. Now that actually, I believe, transitions us very well into our second point.
Right. The second point for me is doing analytics with the data. That's a fancy word, just saying, getting this information, looking at it. It can be as simple as trending of the information, seeing what the trending is, why there's variations, what causes those variations. Then you can start getting into KPIs using that information, like kilowatt hours per ton, or then you can do some fancy things with regression analysis, comparing the energy with the drivers, and then even you can get even more sophisticated and start using statistical analysis like QSUM to figure out what changes have happened and when did they happen. And it's really quite interesting. Some of these fancy words, they're not that complicated, and you can see things pretty quickly, even with monthly data, which is sometimes surprising for clients. So analytics, if you know what you're doing, and again, you want to try to make it as repetitive as possible so you don't have to keep on redesigning this. It's a very powerful tool to help clients with energy/carbon.
This is going to sound a bit of a repeat of one of Dave's points, but it's phrased differently. Why not? My starting point was understand what energy means to your organisation. My next bit is checking that your data collection of both energy, cost and consumption, and the other factors which Dave has mentioned. The bit I'm adding to it, though, that process is fit for purpose. And that means understanding what the purpose of collecting that information is. And it's very easy, and I've seen this happen, where people have done, we need to do something with energy data. And they've gone out and got a commercial product that perhaps is doing something with it that may not be the right product or the right approach for their organisation. So there's no point in collecting data if you don't know what you're going to do with it. And I'd pick up on Dave's point as well. Part of your data collection, your next bit is the analytics. So are you collecting the right things you need for the analytics, and are you using the analytics that are right for your organisation? And I'm going to suggest, as it's a new year, even if you've been doing this for some time, why not have, shall we say, an interim audit of what you're doing on data collection and saying, does it do the job?
Great points, John. Couple things you said that I think really need to be emphasized. When you're looking this, you should be looking at consumption and pricing and costing. They shouldn't be treated just looking at one item. They should be combined. And then the other thing, which I think the idea of someone checking, evaluating, we've talked about this a number of times in our podcast, getting your financial people involved in this process to help quantify or qualify or confirm the numbers would be really helpful. So what you said is getting someone to audit what's going on and getting a third party inside the company possibly to help out. I think it would be really valuable. So key points.
Yeah.
All right, and on both of those points, actually, if you're listening and you're not exactly sure what any of your energy data points come from and what they mean, we have quite a few episodes on energy markets, especially with our guests James Williams and Stephen Shork. If you want to get a bit more background on where those numbers are even coming from, we have quite a few episodes that you can listen to on that. Now on to our third point. John?
Okay, the third point. This is brought out of years of experience, let's say, but identify who in the organisation can make a difference to energy and carbon use and target them. Sometimes there's two extremes. Sometimes there's a standalone energy manager sat in a little office who's not connected to anybody. That's wrong. The other one is trying to engage everybody across the organisation at the same level. That's not cost effective and doesn't necessarily work. But do an audit again, if you like, of who are the people who have their, let's say, the finger on the button, the people who can make a big difference in what you're using. And I'll give an example of that. A few years back, I was doing some work with a glass container or glass bottle maker, and we discovered that there were two guys who had immense control. They were sat in a control room for the melting furnaces, and each of them had a switch that, if they flicked it, would bring in 5 megawatts of additional heat onto the furnaces. Now, those guys need to know what they're doing and why. And if you don't include them, you're missing out. But I think it's, again, this understanding of how you use energy. If somebody's sat in an office and you've got automatically controlled lights, and the heating's automatically controlled, they need to be aware, but what difference can they make? Where are the people who got their finger on the switch or can change operational behaviour or procedures? You want to identify who those people are. And I'm going to almost steal one of Dave's points, possibly. And some of those people should be part of a multidisciplinary team. But I'll leave that element of it, perhaps, if Dave's going to pick up on that.
What a great segue, John. Okay, so staying with John's thought process, it's a multidiscipline team, and also reinforcing what John's saying. You don't have to be politically correct here. You want people that have a real interest and passion in this topic. So don't try to get everyone involved. I think we've learned some valuable lessons in our few years that we've been doing this, John, that you really want to get people that have a genuine interest of making
Yeah.
a difference and in the topic. But when you have these people, you want to make sure they're properly informed and educated, because you actually want them to write an annual energy plan that slash carbon plan that the organization will buy in, sign, and execute. And so it's really important. It's a plan that they are involved in writing, not some consultant writing the plan, because if a consultant's writing the plan, it's the consultant's plan. If it's actually the multidiscipline team writing the plan, it's their plan. And then staying with that, it's really important that the plan is reviewed, understood, and signed by senior management and also key stakeholders that may not be in the team, because you want their involvement and buy-in. So it's not just, I've done a plan, I've done my job, see you later. It's so you can do the actual fourth step that we're going to talk about as well.
That's great. Thanks, Dave and John, for that point. I want to also draw our listeners' attention to our episode number 44, which was with our client Derez, and it's all about building and managing an energy team. So that's a real case study on a company that's done exactly what we're talking about today. So we've talked about data, we've talked about people. Dave already entered into our next one, but can we start off with our point number 4?
Okay, so once the plan has been signed and approved, and by the way, in this plan, each member of the team should have accountability and responsibility to take certain actions. It shouldn't be one person You might have a team lead, but that's not their job to do these actions. It should be spread around. Then this has to be implemented. So that's the key, because a lot of times people will do something, get it approved, and then there's no follow-up. So literally, this plan has to be implemented. We're encouraging when that happens that the plan is reviewed. The team gets together once a month minimum and reviews what has been done, what are the challenges associated with it, what are the obstacles, and try to figure that out.
Okay, my fourth point actually starts shifting the focus a bit towards carbon, because inevitably that's one of the topics we've got to look at. My point on this one is a simple one, really. When you start looking at carbon, start with what are called scopes 1 and 2, which are really the carbon emissions that you directly control. And I'm sure Lysandra will point out an episode of our podcast that can help you in that one. But start with those, because you've got control of them. You can measure them accurately. And guess what? To measure them accurately, you need good energy data, and you need a good data collection system. So our whole approach, it's interesting. I won't say it's necessarily fully data focused, but there's an underlying requirement for good data and data management to drive any energy management, carbon management approach forward. So start off, understand what, if you don't already, understand what scopes 1 and 2 are. In simple terms, they are the energy uses that you control directly. Don't worry about scope 3, which is your supply chain and everything else. You will have to look at that at some point, but quite frankly, you want to make something that's going to be an immediate cost benefit to you, and look at 1 and 2, because the chances are you can make carbon reductions there that actually impact on your bottom line as well.
And like John said, I have quite a few episodes for you on this one. So 2022 was a big carbon year for 360 Energy, in the sense that we put out a lot of educational content on what carbon is. So there are a few episodes you can listen to. We have episode number 30, which is Carbon Tax and Carbon Regulation Basics. Really just gives you the fundamentals of what is carbon in the business space. We have Carbon Offsets 101, which is episode number 33. We have one of my personal favorites, which is our internal carbon episode, and that's our 360 Carbon Excellence Program, which is a new program 360 has launched in 2022. So make sure to listen to episode number 49 for more information on that. And of course, quite a few other carbon episodes. Just give them a listen and hopefully you learn something. Now on to our last point, point number 5.
Mine is fairly straightforward. Again, you'll see it links in, but you need to develop or make sure that you have an organisation-wide, open and active approach to energy and carbon. Now, what am I talking about there? Organisation-wide, this comes back down to the multidisciplinary aspect. It's not a single focus. Energy and carbon are strategic issues for any business. They need to be addressed. Open, often there's a degree of almost secrecy around some of these things. I cannot believe the number of occasions we've worked with a client and we've wanted information on energy consumption or something like that, and they've had trouble getting it or sharing it. And whilst you don't want to bury people in detail, you want it to be open. So I would like the idea that we could walk into any organisation that says it's doing something about energy and carbon, speak to anybody there, and they could say, oh yes, we've got a program that's doing something about that. They may not know all the details. They might say, you need to speak to Harry or Fred or Vera or whoever, but there's something there that they can do. An active approach as well. So you need to be doing something, and it needs to be proactive ideally. Yes, you're going to have to react, but it needs to be proactive. So the 3 words that I'm looking at for your approach is it's open, it's organisation-wide, that's a hyphenated word, and active. Open, active, organisation-wide. That's what you need. Do a check. If that's not what you've got, start doing something about it.
want to pick up on something you said, John, but maybe I should have said it in the planning stage. Because we are talking about energy and we are talking about carbon because they're the same thing basically. So when you're looking at energy, people typically look at this in a 1 year, 2 year window maybe. When you're looking at carbon, you really have to look at a 5 year window because some of the actions you're taking, you're not going to do in the first year. It's going to take time for you to do it. So that lens is a little different. It's a different lens on carbon versus energy, but
Yeah.
they are integrated. Okay, the fifth thing that I would be conveying is that staying with John, it's almost like we work together. The idea
Isn't it?
of monitoring and reporting. So let me explain what that means. That means that in fact you're actually the actions you're taking, you're seeing what and you're measuring those actions. What impact did it have to your organization? Were you successful? Were you unsuccessful? And be aware people shouldn't be like if you're unsuccessful, you can learn from that too, by the way. So that should be looked at and that information should be shared and reported frequently to depending on the hierarchy. So with if you've got granular data, so like hourly interval data, that stuff can be reported daily. If you're looking at monthly data, these monitoring and reports should be sent back to the team or reviewed by the team every month to show what actions they've done and what implications it's had to their energy slash carbon. And, and don't get this lost because not only should that report be reviewed and understood by the team, it should also be shared to the executive to demonstrate to you that actually energy is controllable or carbon is controllable. Because often they don't see that lens, they don't see that information. And so I'll go one step further on that is we encourage clients to sit down with their team, with the executives quarterly or every 6 months and to review this in detail so the executives can actually see what is going on. And it's actually beneficial to the teams because they now get a laneway to the executives directly. They're not buffered. And then the executives see, wow, like I've got some future leaders in my company. They can start picking out people. So certainly this 5 step process is really just quite frankly solid management process in summary from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think for a listener who maybe is at an organization that hasn't done anything in the energy and carbon space, I want to let you know that every month you're going to learn so much, and it may seem daunting in the beginning of the year, but by the end of the year, you're going to have so much more knowledge. And if you want some sort of inspiration on that, we have Energy Markets in 8 months with Allison, and that's our episode number 34. And you can follow along her journey of starting in energy markets and her difference in knowledge from month 1 all the way to month 8. And I think it'll make you realize that you can do this carbon and energy journey as well. All right, to end off this episode, what is our biggest takeaway?
Okay,
Now that
I'll have. Oh,
go
you
ahead,
go
John.
on.
Wow, you're so excited today. Both of
Uh,
you want to just let
Yeah.
me know your biggest
well,
takeaway.
maybe I'll just pipe in real quick. I think it just shows that certainly John and I are. It's almost like we're talking from the same book, probably because we are. And it's good that we have different perspectives because you need those different perspectives to actually articulate and explain that to different people throughout the whole organization because different people hear things different ways and interpret them. So I think the idea of having just an example of different people thinking about this, of course, is why you should have more than one person or one department acting.
Okay, I'm going to go slightly off track with this. We're talking about this being, the start of a new year. And I don't know how many people play the game of setting New Year's resolutions and putting down these things you're going to do. And somebody came up with the idea, and I'm going to just give you the idea. I'm not going to give you how to do this. Somebody came up with the idea of, yeah, the chances are you're going to put down things there that you can't really do or you don't do, and they all drift away. And somebody said, why don't you think about 3 words that describe how you want to address the year coming up? and then just have those 3 words, print them out, stick them on the wall as sort of touchstones to remind you of what you're going to do and where you're going. So how about thinking of 3 words that could describe what you're going to do about energy and carbon? And I'm not saying come back to my organisation-wide open and active, but think of something like that you think could describe, if you like, the ethos, the mission statement of what you're trying to do, or how you want to engage with energy and carbon. And just think of an idea like that. It's a slightly different way of going about it, but the new year is always a good time to sort of look at things and recalibrate.
I think my biggest takeaway is listening to this. I think for businesses and organizations, it's your gut instinct to go with people who know the business very well to be on your energy team. I'd like to challenge you a little bit and include people that maybe are newer to your company, because I do think that they will point out things and they will ask questions that you have become so used to, you don't really see areas of waste and things like that. So I would just say make sure you include a diverse group of people, new hires, people that have been there for a few years, people that have been there for a long time, just to get a great encompassing representation of your organization for energy and carbon. All right. Happy New Year, Dave and John.
Thanks, Lysandra. Looking forward to the remainder of 2023.
Me too. Talk to you next week.
You bet.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.